Holly O'Connor, Cap 4, Semester 2, Sketchbook 1. I think you lost all interest in this world. You were discouraged and lost interest in everything. So you abandoned your physical body. You went to a world apart, and you're living in a different kind of life there, in a world inside you. Haruki Murakami, 1Q84. Page 2 and 3 show my photographs that Fergus took of the back show, which ended up being a big success. I think it was a big turning point in my work, and I was, needless to say, really proud of what I'd managed to produce. It was my first time trying cutouts, as I mentioned in page 4. There were some issues there, but I've detailed it in some of the notes there. Page 5 begins showing the design process for my dissertation front cover. My idea behind it was that I wanted to make like a little sculpture made from cardboard, preferably of like a museum or something like that, as a way of kind of representing museums as being kind of fragile structures in terms of, you know, not being very supportive of anyone else that is not cis, white, able-bodied male kind of idea. On page 6 you can just see some of the sketches that I have there, and on page 7 I started to move on a little bit. I wanted to have a little look at neurons and literal representations of neurodiversity, because that's something that I talk about a lot in my dissertation. So I was looking at like scientific diagrams of neurons, and I thought that they looked a lot like stars, and I wanted to play around with that because stars can also be associated with kind of dreaminess and space and all that kind of thing. And then for some reason it kind of reminded me a little bit of one of my favourite films, Howl's Moving Castle. It's a Studio Ghibli film, and there is a scene in it where you have these star children dancing in a circle around Howl and Sophie, who are the main characters. And I thought they looked very similar to what a lot of the diagrams show of like a neuron. And of course, being neurodivergent myself, I just thought that was like really nice kind of symbology, or like a nice imagery and a nice little relationship between those two. As you can see in page 8, I started to look at Henry Matisse as an example, because I just thought of the whole dancing in the circle thing was quite interesting. And so I had a wee look at that as an image and kind of used it as a reference while making some initial sketches. So that's what I did, and I have the initial sketch on that page as well, which I really liked actually. On page 9 I was trying to combine the original idea of the museum kind of symbology and imagery and stuff, like representing institutions and structures and stuff with a literal kind of pillar image. And then I had the idea to have the stars kind of floating around them, like in like holding hands kind of thing, similar to what they were like in the movie. I thought that was really nice, and yeah. In page 10 you can see the initial kind of sketches that were kind of starting to evolve a bit more. That was when I started to make more and more like ideas for the cover of the dissertation. And then on page 11 I went in another direction again with the stars and like the neuron stars, because I thought that they looked a wee bit, the way I was designing them, they were looking a wee bit too much like just stars, and if you didn't know what I was talking about, within the book that, or what neurons looked like, which I don't show in the book, you probably wouldn't understand the kind of reference being made. So I did use the symbol for neurodiversity, which is an infinity symbol. Usually it is rainbow coloured. In this case, I've used different colours for each of the stars. Page 12 just shows you what the cover looks like when it's printed, so I was quite happy with that. So, page 13, my dissertation and the connections to my work. So, I intentionally made the dissertation revolve around the themes that I'm talking about in my work because they're themes I'm very passionate about and think are important to discuss. So in relation to contemporary art and what I'm doing right now, the topics that I do touch on would definitely be obviously neurodiversity, The Principle of Hope by Ernst Bloch, also looking at Marxist theory and in particular Marxist dialectical materialism as a way of looking at utopian thought and how society progresses forward. And there's like a kind of aspirational, but not in an advancing above people in society kind of way, but aspirational in terms of, you know, dreams and wanting better for society. That I discuss a lot of that in the dissertation as well as in my work too. Also with the differences being that my work, like my artwork, doesn't really look at the kind of institutional problems that I have, whereas the dissertation does. The dissertation looks specifically at issues within the art world, issues within institutions that need to change in order for neurodivergent artists to kind of flourish. Maybe not even just neurodivergent, perhaps all disabled artists. Page 14 has the big mind map that I had up on the wall in my studio, of how all these ideas kind of connect and stuff. A lot of them, in my opinion, are very closely connected. They all are intrinsically linked to each other. So page 15, I've just shown some of the annotation from my absolute Bible, favourite book ever is Neurodiversity, by Judy Singer. She is the woman who coined the term neurodiversity, and some of the notes that I've kind of highlighted and what I discuss are related to defining neurodiversity, defining the difference between impairment and disability, and also considering what disability is as a concept, the fact that it is a social restraint on people. Disability exists as a barrier for people who are different or who may or may not be impaired also. In my case, I'm not impaired, but I definitely am disabled because the neurotypical world that I live in disables me because of expectation and of barriers and lack of accommodation as well. Her work also touches upon capitalism and hegemony and just how, there's a lot more to neurodiversity and disability than meets the eye. A lot of the issues we face aren't people just not being empathetic or understanding, but a lot of it is very systematic and difficult to change because systems are difficult to change unless there is a collective kind of agreement that overhaul or large scale change has to occur. So applying neurodiversity to art to me personally has been a little bit challenging, or it certainly was at first, just in terms of making art about neurodiversity, especially as someone who's just been freshly diagnosed as well. It has been quite difficult to kind of accept like my own struggles and all that. But yeah, I found it quite hard to come across artists who actually openly discuss their disability or make their art about disability, full stop, especially invisible disabilities. But that is kind of something that changed a bit when I met the external examiner, which I will go into further soon. So page 17 explores the neurodiversity, like the ideas that I want to explore, or I had wanted to explore. So obviously there are like the kind of more philosophical and political ideas that I like to have a little chat about, but specific ones are related to things that I can relate to and feel that I can openly talk about comfortably, which are things that I do. So masking, for example, stimming, and coping in a neurotypical world and functioning in a neurotypical world and neurotypical expectations also. So with masking, that is a very common thing that happens in a lot of autistic people, but it is not just autism, it is generally like neurodivergent people that experience masking, but I will go a lot further into masking soon. Stimming, again I'll go into that further, all related to self-soothing, and it can look a little bit funny to the outsider, but it is something that's quite important to people that do it. Coping in a neurotypical world, you know, I talk about this in my dissertation as well, about community and the importance of community and collaboration, especially when you're a kind of marginalised group, or you're a group that is kind of maybe not well, in some cases ostracised, but finds it quite difficult to live in the current conditions. Yeah, so you can have a little look for yourselves at the little mind map that I have there. So on page 18, I talk about Kai Sung Tan, who's an artist that the external examiner recommended to me. And she is an artist with ADHD, and I actually came across her work when I was looking for research relating to contemporary art and neurodiversity, and she makes a lot of her own work. She's also a curator as well and researcher. She's someone who I talk about in my PPD portfolio, someone who, upon like researching more of her stuff, I am kind of in awe of her. She's a big inspiration in terms of all of her practice, all of the different things that she does, and yeah, I don't know if I look at her like individual pieces and necessarily look at them and want to kind of copy the aesthetic of them, but I certainly look at her practice and how she functions as a contemporary artist with a disability. I certainly look at that as a kind of source of inspiration. On page 20, I talk about Sam Metz here. They are a choreographic object maker. So they look a lot at choreography and the object, and how objects become choreographic simply by like the imitation of movement and copying through empathy, like the movement of these objects. So they will paint, they might cover themselves in paint, they might do big sweeping movements and stuff. They are also a neurodivergent artist also. They have sensory processing differences, and these objects allow them to work in non-verbal ways that begin and end in movement. So they are non-verbal, and so this movement, these sweeping long movements that are expressive and flowing, are like an expression of empathy almost, to the different objects and spaces and shapes that are kind of occurring in whatever space that they might be making choreography within. I think for some reason this work kind of reminds me a little bit of stimming, which is, again, I will go into later, but I do think that the works with the repetitive movement, they make a nice reference to that, and again, it's also nice to know that there are artists out there that use their disability in their work. Just because we go through stimming and masking and all these different things, and because it's almost like a natural part of our life, whether we like it or not, doesn't mean that, you know, we shouldn't make work about it or that we should keep quiet about it. So I think that having a look at these kind of works are quite important to me. Page 21 has my statement of intent. Pages 22 and 23 have some pictures of one of my favourite chapters in a book, and it is on Marx's dialectical materialism. It's from the comic book version of Marx, just because I again have ADHD, and so short and punchy information is something that I really value, but I get a lot out of it. So this the dialectical materialism aspect of my work comes from me being a Marxist, I would say. It's always something that I like to read about and try and keep up to date learning about all the time. In this case, I like to think about material dialectics in the sense of progress and hope, and the way society can propel itself forward through contradictions. So, dialectical materialism representing the physical world, the opposite of idealism would be materialism, in terms of humanity and humans and society being shaped by the world that we exist in, as opposed to the world we exist in being shaped by us. So when we shape society, or when society shapes us rather, it is usually a result of whatever has come before us. So whatever contradictions in history have occurred, whatever kind of arguments have happened, have changed circumstances so that new conditions can be made in whatever epoch that we live through. So when we talk about dialectical materialism, that is where the contradictions happen. It is where the arguments start, and where people start to kind of rise up and make collective decisions about major changes within certain time periods. One quote that I really enjoy from the last little page sample on page 23, where it says the Marxist ideologies of progress from Etienne Balibar's book, The Philosophy of Marx. He says that Marxism, which has perpetuated the idea that those at the bottom play an active role in history by propelling themselves forward and propelling it upwards and onwards, to the extent that the idea of progress includes not just hope but a prior certainty. So I think that highlights the natural and expected progress that will happen and occur in society. Sometimes we might take steps backwards, but we will always kind of find a way to propel ourselves forward. And I think that's quite a nice, hopeful way of looking at society as a whole. Page 25 shows a diagram or a mind map that I made back in third year, which explained in detail how I explore materialism and where my ideas come from in terms of that. So page 26, how is materiality explored in art? So it can be explored in lots of different ways, but I think that literal materials are what's used mostly within contemporary art, for the obvious reason that art is a very materialistic thing to exist. It's very stuff based. It's the best way I can explain it. So I think looking at things like fabric, looking at materials, comparing softness, hardness, textures, stuff like that, and that's something that can actually relate back to neurodiversity again, in terms of the sensory. People like myself who are neurodivergent can often have either overactive senses or underactive senses, so they can be sensory seeking or sensory avoidant. So I think that materiality is quite an important aspect within neurodivergent people's lives. It's something that they inherently are quite aware of. Not that people aren't aware of materiality, but I think that some people are kind of a bit more conscious of it than others, just in their day-to-day lives, realising textures, noticing, feeling of different things, etc. On page 27 is an artist that Rose and Caitlin actually recommended to me. That is Ellie Turner, whose work in textiles looks at surfaces and materiality in this sense. She makes props and garments that are specifically tailored to be in to look at it and be inquisitive and to touch it and to feel it and to just really explore what's going on with the textures and stuff. She also works with children with additional support needs as someone who grew up with her brother who has autism. So I think she kind of knows what she's talking about with this kind of stuff. But I was also interested in the fact that her colour choice is quite similar to the colour choice that I tend to go for also. Pastels are really easy on the eye, in my opinion. They are quite soothing and quite easy to look at, which matches what she's kind of trying to achieve quite well. So and even when they are bright, they're still soft, and the material helps it to mutes it a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to take in also. I think it could be interesting to work more with fabric in the future. I mean, this I'm talking after I'd made this page, but because obviously I'm now on page 27 and going on to page 28. So I wanted to have a look at fabrics. I wanted to explore more material things as a painter, because I do consider myself a painter first and foremost, even though I'm in CAP. Yeah, I like to think of things from that perspective, from a kind of two-dimensional point of view, but that's definitely something that I want to branch out on a little bit, so that it was something that I did branch out on. Page 29 shows another artist that Rose and Caitlin recommended to me, so that was Octavia Schreiner. She makes these gorgeous like ceramic pieces that are quite unusual. They're like objects, they're kind of proppy in my opinion, which I really like. So they're non-functional objects, which is quite interesting because I think people always assume ceramics kind of need to be used for something, like cups, bowls, whatever. But I quite like it when people use ceramics and kind of like more as an art piece than a functional object to use. So that was really nice. But she has these gorgeous little like ceramic balls with using glaze to like paint trees on them and stuff. I thought they were really, really nice. And obviously I've explored some ceramics last semester, but I think that's definitely something I can still look into. So going on to page 31, I'm just having a wee look at ceramics and storytelling and materiality. So I think that storytelling through raw materials, through it's not unconventional because it's a very ancient technique of storytelling through like ancient Greek mythology being painted on vases and plates and stuff. But I still think that that's kind of like it's been kind of lost a little bit in time, I think, personally. But with Mal Projects, I've got a little image on that page also of Mal Projects, one of her vases, where it's a completely non-functional object. It's a vase, but it has holes in it. It's got these beautiful, beautiful pearls in it and stuff. So it's not going to function as a vase where you put water in and put flowers in it. But it's there and it looks interesting. It's an art piece and I really do like that. And I like the whole narrative storytelling, almost illustrative way of using ceramics, the way Octavia uses, and how the kind of ancient Greeks used it also. I think that could be something that would be quite interesting to explore also, just because I like to talk about narrative and fiction and storytelling in my work sometimes also. So speaking of narrative and storytelling, another artist Rose and Caitlin recommended was Sally Hackett, whose work is like quite theatrical and quite like prop-like again. She uses like quite simple materials, like paper mache and stuff like that, and the little objects almost they stand out on their own. They're like little mini sculptures, some of them as well, and I think that could be something that would be really I thought it would be something that would be really interesting to look into. So page 32, I had a look at the art objects, so connecting objects and theatre in particular. So yeah, just once again having a look at how can objects tell a story, how can we go back to those ancient techniques of storytelling. I made a little image where I had the little masks that I made in the first semester in ceramics, and make like a little drawing of a vase that would be completely unfunctional, but there's something quite nice and interesting about that concept. especially if I'm relating it back to kind of neurodiversity and stuff, because something that I found really interesting with looking at the origins of the neurodiversity movement, something that Judy Singer talks about a lot is usefulness and capitalism and the neurodivergent place within the capitalist system, and how neurodiversity can be kind of labelled as, you know, like it's inherently seen as a flaw, as a result almost of being seen as useless and, you know, dysfunctional as well, instead of being seen for your what you are good for, you know. And not that we should be valued for only for what we can provide to capitalism. That's not what I'm saying at all, but it's just that, you know, it can be tiring to be seen as defective most of the time, and that's something that is deep rooted within our society, within neurotypical society. So if I were to compare neurodivergent people to ceramics, for example, we would probably be these kind of dysfunctional objects that don't function the way that they should, but, you know, they certainly are pleasing in many other ways, you know. Yeah, I quite like that. I quite like that that imagery of the broken vase, or the vase that has holes in it. It's completely unfunctional, but it's functional in the sense that it is interesting. So on page 34, I'm having a look at Ernst Bloch's The Principle of Hope. Now, this is the major undercurrent of everything that my work has ever been about. The Principle of Hope by Ernst Bloch is, yeah, it's like the bloodline of any of the conceptual ideas that I've ever kind of came across. It is the belief that through hope we are provided with something called anticipatory illumination. So long as people have hope, and so long as we dream, and this isn't nighttime dreams, this is daydreaming. So long as we are daydreaming, so long as we are hoping for a better future, there is a direction and there is a path to a potential future that could come true. So that's not saying the more you think it, the more it's going to come true. And the way Bloch talks about it, it is more about systems. So he was a Marxist himself also. So he was talking about, you know, you can be a bourgeoisie person with hopes of being richer, you know, but the principle of hope isn't concerned with that, because true hope and true progress lies within, you know, the aspiration and hope that those that are marginalized within society, it is the kind of light and the kind of beacon in the distance that they can look towards in order to get direction to where they want to be. This happens a lot through art and through literature and through poetry and all kinds of art forms, and it happens even through science, speculative science, and speculative art. You know, they're out there, they're you know, they're considered a bit wacky, a little bit nuts, but it's because it's hope and because it is speculative that it works so well for driving us forward. So without plans that are so far ahead that they seem a bit out of reach, without these, you know, we wouldn't really be looking at a direction to go, basically. So Walter Benjamin talks about the dialectics and dream obviously dialectics, talking about moving from one epoch to the other through, this kind of like discourse and argument and contradictions that happen within society. That constant movement and constant progress that is guaranteed to always happen because it always has happened throughout human history. So with that, when it comes to hope and when it comes to the kind of daydreams of situations that are better and easier than what they already are, and they're out there, we dream of the crumbling of the epoch that we're living in while we live inside of it. So we dream of a distant epoch where things are better and the things that are wrong with the current one crumble. To have unrestricted dream and hope, and by unrestricted I mean it can go as far into the future or can be as out there as possible. To have that, and to have something that is not yet, that is Bloch's favourite thing to say, is the not yet. To have things that are not yet happened, but to be dreaming of it, is enough for there to be that kind of spark. So pages 38 and 39 show some photographs of I've got a lot of favourite books, but another favourite of mine is a book on speculative design, but it also includes speculative contemporary art as well. But it's a book talking about the boundaries of how much speculation we can use within art and design. And I found that quite interesting because they talk a lot about how when we make art or literature or design or anything cultural like that, or music even, that is speculative and provides alternatives. They might be way out there, unrealistic, might not ever be able to achieve them, but it highlights what is going on now. It's like a projection almost. So it projects into the present time. The future, this imagined future, projects into the past what issues actually are there. And that is something that I've done a lot of research on when I'm researching science fiction. It's something that a few of my favourite authors talk about. So Donna Haraway, obviously Ursula K. Le Guin, who wrote the Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, that's talked about before, and the author of The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. They all talk about how science fiction aims to create speculative futures that can either provide, they can be out there for no reason, but most of the time science fiction with any kind of plot line provides like ideas for the present. Same with like dystopian fiction. Obviously Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale is a bit of a scary example because it's not too far from being real, but things like that. Dystopian fiction, for example, similarly to science fiction, acts as a warning, as opposed to a what if. It acts as a what if, but in a scared tone, whereas if it is just science fiction that doesn't concern itself with deep-rooted cultural, social issues, it does project into the kind of present, our present. What can be changed from now? Where can we start going towards in the future? So I kind of, I don't explain it, but I have my notes and stuff from my book on page 40 also. But just on the topic of science fiction, one thing that has always stuck with me was the exhibition I went to see way back in 2019, which was Seized by the Left Hand in Dundee Contemporary Arts. And it was a collaborative group exhibition on artists responding to Ursula K. Le Guin's book, The Left Hand of Darkness, as it was a book that was very ahead of its time in terms of considering gender and binary, because a lot of the planet that it is based on, because it's science fiction, it is you're not born with any sex, but you evolve into a sex, which was quite revolutionary for its time. A lot of people were angry, a lot of people were up in arms about it, but yeah, the exhibition was amazing. It inspired me a lot, and I would safely say it was what introduced me to utopian thought, utopian thinking, science fiction, which connects directly to Ernst Bloch's principle of hope, and therefore to the Marxian dialectic. Again, as a materialist, I can really, I really enjoy reading about. So, Seized by the Left Hand was, it was amazing. So, a couple other artists, this is page 42 now, a couple artists that I really am quite inspired by, but maybe not they did inspire the my final kind of outcome, but maybe not as much as others, but they're still kind of in there. David Blandy, he is an artist that I really enjoy his work. He does work a lot on different things actually, but he kind of embraces nerd culture, which I enjoy. He made a tabletop game similar to Dungeons and Dragons for a community down south. I can't quite remember where it was again. But he made a rule book, he made dice, they made a board, they made characters and races and everything. And it was set in I think it was set in a world where an ecosystem had taken over and it had become brand new, a bit like the film Annihilation. The one that Natalie Portman was in. That's kind of what it reminds me of. But he also makes a lot of work about the Cthulhu scene and, but again, he embraces the kind of science fiction, narrative speculation side of contemporary art, which I find really interesting. Charles Avery is another artist who does this exactly, but speculative fiction. In contemporary art, he does a lot of world building. He makes this kind of planet and creatures and stuff, and I just find that something about that is just really interesting to me. I don't know if it's because I'm also a massive nerd, but there's something that I really enjoy actually. So I think 2019 was definitely a year for me because I keep going back to it, but in 2019 I saw the Neo-Neanderthals exhibition by the artists Robbie Bush and Gian Canizo, I think. It was an exhibition in Edinburgh and I was awestruck. I think that was definitely the year for art and fiction and speculation kind of collaborating together, and it was an exhibition that had a speculative look at a potential outcome almost of the world, of our current world, where humans and Neanderthals bred together, and there was a kind of boom in Neanderthal population all of a sudden, and where Homo sapiens, like us, essentially, we kind of die out almost. But I just found like the paintings that they make, and they made like fake artifacts that I really enjoyed. So they made like a fake like little snow dog thing, and a fake kind of like skin suit almost. Their exhibition was, yeah, it was really interesting to me, and I liked the fact that it was creating a false narrative, and it was exhibiting items that that aren't actually part of any kind of history or anything like that. It's purely speculative, but to show it as if it is an artifact was really interesting, and I really wanted to explore that further, and I ended up doing that. Page 45 is just showing one of the little drawings I did in second year, actually. A lot of these are second year ones, actually. So page 45 and 46 are two drawings that I made, specifically looking at speculation and fiction. So I wanted to draw and make images that you didn't know any story behind them, but they told a story, if you get me. I wanted to kind of practice that. So I had the house that's on like another planet, like similar to Dune or something, you know, and it's got the little bubble with oxygen in it and stuff. I just wanted to do a bit of like non-verbal storytelling with that one. With the other one with the whales, that's quite self-explanatory, just a bit nuts but out there, just looking at fiction and how that could be used in art also. So moving on from the whole science fiction kind of obsession, page 47 is where I made a little like house pop-up, like from a pop-up book, and I'm looking at neurodiversity, belonging and home. So it's something that I want to talk about quite in depth, actually. Something that has always popped up in my work has been this idea of home. What is home? What do you consider home? And will home ever really truly exist? And that is almost like a personal question to myself. But I think that in terms of neurodiversity and being a neurodivergent person, home and the comfort of it never truly exists while you're living in a constant state of discomfort, because that is kind of the definition of home, is comfort and safety, and that is something that we don't really intrinsically live with, especially not on a systematic level. So for my dissertation, I spoke to Zipporah Johnson from Nook Collective, and Nook Collective are a collective of artists who are all neurodivergent. They're based in Edinburgh, and I interviewed her, and we were talking about the meaning of what a nook is. So it's Neuk. A nook is just a word for, it's a Scots word for nook, essentially, like NOOK, where it's like a little nook, a little safe space, a little corner that you kind of burrow yourself in. The reason they're called Nook Collective is because they want to kind of communicate this, collective as this space where you can burrow yourself in and belong in a place that is uninhabitable. So a nook is more than just a corner or just a small space. It is one that you've carved out for yourself. So, for example, the images that I use on page 48 and 49 are of trees. One of them is a photo I took in second year on the analog camera, and I've got a little drawing of a tree there using the Vanta Black paint that I like to use. So the tree, they have the little hole in it, and I know that it's not been like dug out or anything, but I just thought, this idea of like seeking refuge in uninhabitable places, or like places that weren't meant to be inhabited have been inhabited, kind of thing. So by neurodivergent people have, and it doesn't just apply to us, it applies to marginalised groups, full stop. By finding these little spaces, these little places where you can kind of settle into, whether you're welcomed there or not, is just crucial. And it's kind of a shame that it feels that way a lot of the time, to feel comfortable, to feel, I don't know, you feel kind of like kind of burdensome for asking for help or for asking for safety, or what safety is to you, whether it's feeling safe from sensory overload, which is very difficult to avoid, especially in art school. You do end up feeling like you are intruding, or that you are, you just want to hide and bury yourself and, put yourself in a little nook and be safe there for a little while. So on page 50 and 51, I have dedicated this page to looking at Pip and Pop, who are two Australian artists who work predominantly with sugar. A lot of their work discusses topics such as the ephemeral, ephemeral nature, kind of immateriality, even though their work is very material, in terms of it's like considered a lot before they make their work. It's the kind of how quickly it can become nothing, almost, like one gust of wind and their work can become like destroyed in a second. So yeah, they look at the ephemeral, immaterial, and like excessiveness as well. They use a lot of pinks and bright neon colours and stuff, and it's like like a unicorn vomit all over the floor, and I kind of love it. The little girl in me screaming of excitement looking at it. But yeah, I've always looked at their work just almost because I like how it looks, but also because of their unapologeticness with the kind of with how obnoxiously bright it can be as well. I like the materials they use. I like the sugar idea. I personally wouldn't use it, I don't think. Maybe one day. But yeah, I like the excess. I think my works could be quite simple and quite sometimes minimalistic. Certainly not my practice. It's not minimalistic at all, but I think that looking at works that aesthetically you enjoy is important too, I think. But on page 51, I also made a sketch, a really quick one, of a potential idea that popped into my head where I had thought about creating nooks. So going back to the kind of, burrowing, creating little nooks and places in the walls of a studio space or in the walls of the exhibition space. But they've got little worlds inside of them. So I don't know, again, I wasn't really thinking the logistics of it, but I was thinking, what if I had false walls and I could make little scenes, almost bright coloured and pastel-y and magical and whimsical, as if when you go to these little nooks, these little spaces, you're kind of seeking refuge and going somewhere that is whimsical and fun and you're enjoying yourself and not having to feel like you're going through the kind of hell that is masking as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world. I also painted a rock pink and put glitter on it just because I felt like it. So now I'd like to discuss maladaption versus adaption. So this is going into a topic that I've not actually really talked about much, but it is very, very important. It's a very important turning point as well. So, but it does relate back to principle of hope, materialism, and all that jazz. So, page 52 and 53, maladaption, or if we think about adaption, it means to adapt to a situation and to change how you are based on your surroundings. It's a basic human instinct of survival, and it's how we've survived for so long, basically. Maladaption is the exact opposite of it. It is finding coping mechanisms, but not adapting or adjusting to the outside world or to your material conditions. So in this sense, I'm looking at maladaption for the neurodivergent person, for people who are kind of constantly under this pressure and under this feeling this weight of disability, of being a disabled person and not being listened to and having expectations to be normal, quote unquote. So then I want to look at something called maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreaming is daydreaming, like Ernst Bloch believed, was, the driver of the principle of hope. It's what creates anticipatory illumination. It gives us direction. It gives us vision. It's a good thing, generally. But maladaptive daydreaming becomes a problem, and it is almost considered its own subgenre of disability to some, but it's not been quite confirmed yet by researchers. But maladaptive daydreaming is something that a lot of neurodivergent people do, not even just neurodivergent, even people with quite severe mental illnesses maladaptive daydream as a way of choosing a false built world in one's mind over the material reality that they live in. So maladaptive daydreaming is what I'm going to explore further. So on page 53 I have wrote self-built worlds and paracosms. So a paracosm is an elaborate built world in one's imagination, usually children. But if you're a maladaptive daydreamer, then you have established paracosms. A paracosm, to me, is different to what a paracosm may be to someone else. I am a maladaptive daydreamer. I am someone who likes to think that I pass as quite neurotypical. I am what people would call high functioning autistic and have ADHD. People often sometimes don't believe me when I say it. I sometimes find it hard to believe my own disability myself, but the maladaptive daydreaming would suggest otherwise, and it's something that I've done ever since I was a little girl, often through stimming as well, which I'll go further into later. I would have elaborate worlds built in my head, and I'd have stories in my head and plot lines. And like a director in a cinema, I would cut through scenes and stop them if it wasn't good enough. And if I didn't like a scene in my head, I would repeat it until I liked it. It could happen 10 times. I could be sitting there for half a day, repeating the same pattern, repeating the same scene in my head, as a way of kind of coping with whatever stimuli that I didn't like at the time, whatever was really getting to me in the outside world. So I'll go back to this later for more development, But page 54 is where I was having a little look at Yvette Bathgate, who was suggested to me by Rose and Caitlin again. So Yvette was at Gray's, and I really liked her work where she had the hole in the floor. And she also did a work where she had like a kind of luminescent glitter almost in a dark room. It was beautiful. But I think I just wanted to look at her work. Obviously it's gorgeous and it's really pleasant to look at, but also it's really ambitious, and I wanted to have a look at someone who was having these like really ambitious ideas and kind of acted upon them for Degree Show and stuff. I never ended up doing anything like doing holes in the wall or anything like that, but I did look at Yvette Bathgate anyway if I was going to do that, simply because again with the Nooks thing with carving out something, it looks like she's carved out the floor, so I thought, what if I could literally carve out a space within the studio space. Didn't end up doing it, but it was still an idea, and I quite enjoyed it. So on page 56, 57 and 58, I had put up a little sign thing outside of the Mac Lab in Gray's, and it just says, fellow neurodivergents, stimming is important and we shouldn't feel afraid to do so. In what way do you stim? So I told, I kind of opened up a little bit and wrote how I stim just to kind of get the ball rolling. To be honest, I was not expecting a lot of response, but I ended up having to add 2 more pages onto the bit of paper, because so many people were answering, and it was absolutely amazing, and people do it in so many different ways. Obviously some people were kind of taking a mick with it a wee bit, like writing random stuff, and someone even wrote, what is stimming, and that was interesting, someone wrote fight, interesting, but yeah, that was something that was really quite interesting to me, because it got me back to thinking about Sam Metz's work and their movements, their repeated movements in stimming, and often stimming is something that is repeated movements, but stimming also helps with maladaptive daydreaming. It's a hard connection to make and it's hard to prove, but there is a community online of maladaptive daydreamers who I'm kind of in contact with, and we all kind of discuss this, that pacing and spinning and tapping and stuff is a maladaptive daydreamer's kind of thing to do. It's almost like your physical body has to be moving in some sort of way to transport yourself into this world in your head, which I find very interesting. So on page 59, I wanted to discuss something called the neurotypical gaze. So Jim Hamlin and I thought that I might have coined this term, but I didn't, unfortunately, because it's been mentioned on the internet quite a lot. So that's a shame, but regardless, I define, because I hadn't read about it before, but I came up with it in my head and I thought it made sense. So in my head, the neurotypical gaze is when, of course, neurodivergent people are always masking, but the mask occasionally slips, and it always does, because it's exhausting. The masks are a ton weight. They are a burden to us, and it's not simply just pretending to be someone you're not. It's changing your entire neurological makeup. It's changing your behaviour. It's functioning with 3 spoons as opposed to 5, and it's if you believe in spoon theory, that is. But the neurotypical gaze occurs when you slip into these kind of like things like stimming, things like meltdowns, when you'd see these horrible YouTube videos of parents sharing their child's meltdown on YouTube, as a way of sharing awareness, quote unquote. But to me, the neurotypical gaze, similar to the male gaze, it is an oppressive gaze. It exists to put someone in their place, almost. So I wanted to have a look at that as well, because that can occur with maladaptive daydreaming as well. I noticed the change in my own behaviour from being a child to being an adult now. So when I was maladaptive daydreaming as a child, I was spinning in circles a lot, and then it became pacing as I got older. And now I simply just walk. So I have to go out on a walk, stick my earphones in, and I'll be maladaptive daydreaming for hours just walking. And it took a lot to learn to stop the kind of impulsive movements of when you're in that state. An idea that I'd came up with was that to potentially have some sort of invasion of privacy, or to have this neurotypical gaze, but the audience being the neurotypicals, if you get me. So the audience would be looking at something that they would maybe feel that they shouldn't be looking at. So like a meltdown, or like stimming or something, but they can't look away kind of thing, because they do look funny, or they do look, a bit questionable to neurotypical people, but to us in that moment it makes sense, especially when you're a kid. Another thing that I wanted to look at, and this is on page 62 and 63, is something called dreamcore. Dreamcore is an aesthetic kind of trend online, where it's similar to the whole, there's like a trend of people doing something called shifting, where they will deeply imagine themselves within their favourite character's universe from whatever TV show they're watching or something. And they end up in these kind of dreamcore lands where they did not get transported to where they wanted to be. Instead, they're in this place that looks almost like an old PC desktop background. I found that quite interesting, and it's quite uncanny as well, because it's all very plasticky, all very bright colours, looking perfect places. In dreamcore, that's kind of what it's all about. But there's levels to dreamcore, seemingly. So you can go through levels of different dreams and you pass through them. People believe that they do. I'm not sure about that, but whatever they say. But one of the images on page 63 is like a kind of void, saying, "Don't you wonder what's inside?" And it's quite sinister, but I wanted to include that because it looked quite interesting. It looked quite related to kind of stuff I look at. I look at these kind of voids, these kind of portals almost that just appears out of nowhere. I then came up with the idea of a potential exhibition where you are the outsider looking inside someone's maladaptive daydream, or even just inside of someone's daydream. I really liked that. I really there's something quite sinister about it. It's like a voyeur almost. I also came up with the idea of two closed off parts of a room or something, where there would be one half of the room where perhaps it was a performance, where when you were in one half of a room, you did some certain movements in one way where they were kind of elegant, graceful, and quite nice looking. But then when you go through a door into a different room, the movements change and they become robotic, they become clumsy, they become, you move around in a funny way. And I kind of wanted that to reflect stimming and, the mask breaking, the mask slipping off kind of thing. I thought that was quite interesting. It's quite out there. I knew I wouldn't be able to make it, but an idea that I had came up with was like robots potentially. Or like, I know that we can work with electronics with Malcolm, but that was an idea that I quite enjoyed in my head, more so than being able to make it come true, if you get me. But yeah, so the idea of having like these robots or like some sort of sculptures that are able to move, where they can move gracefully and freely in one space, but then in another space or behind a curtain or something, they like break down or they glitch and they start to kind of fall apart almost. Page 67 was going to explore belonging, home, and an unstable refuge. So again, I wanted to include this idea of the neurotypical gaze, but while you were existing within this nook that you had found, kind of thing. I thought that would have been quite a sad way of looking at it, but like an idea nonetheless. And then on page 63, I was looking at the possibility of living inside of a dream. So could the exhibition be almost like somebody that you can be the viewer existing in this space that is inside of someone else's dream almost. So you're living inside someone's head. So you can have, thoughts and feelings on the wall, or, you can look through a pair of eyes or something as if you're viewing the world or something. I thought that would be really nice. So then page 64, I'm kind of going back to my roots a wee bit. So I'm looking at stage and scenic design. I included a little image of this beautiful stage setting. But yeah, I wanted to reiterate the reason why I like to use stage design and stuff, because I was from a background of theatre, musical theatre and stuff. I was always part of clubs and that as a kid, but again, with stages and stuff, I feel like there's something like a facade, or like something you're trying to pretend that you are something. It's almost like the space is wearing a mask with these cutouts. The cutouts are creating a kind of illusion of a scene that is happening using these props. So page 70 is just having another look at these. They go by wings often. The wings in stage and theatre production and stuff. Obviously people come and go through them, but they also act as layering, and I quite like the thought of considering materiality and layers of what is real and what is not real and stuff, like kind of when you consider fabric of reality and stuff. I quite like that. But yeah, and then I'm looking page 71. It was the first time I kind of looked at cutouts and where they originated from. So within my work, it was a second year project looking at the performance of the natural world and how we kind of see the natural world in a certain way through viewing it in fragmentation almost through the internet and stuff. So I had these logs lined up as if they were cutouts kind of thing, and positioned in a way where they were high up on top of each other and stuff. And that was the first time I was playing with cutouts. Page 72 is when I was working with photography again, when I was working on isolating things. So I had made a silhouette to put over the photograph paper to expose some of it, and then overexpose the background kind of thing. So I started to like isolate stuff from their kind of context, and I quite like doing that with my works, because isolating things from the context that they're in, especially if you consider it to be a cutout, it kind of means that it is a mask, it is a prop, and it is an object, as opposed to being intrinsically part of that background and scenic kind of scene design. Page 74 and 75 was just having a look at Tacita Dean, who was my major inspiration for that project back in second year, where she separated these, kind of natural objects like rocks, mountains and stuff, and made like a kind of deep black background, and it separates them to make them look like they are objects, which is something I quite like, and it's also a form of isolation methods in cinema where you use black backgrounds and stuff. In page 76 and 77, it was where I was combining two images together, but then using masks. So, this is like the literal mask for photography. So I'd obviously expose some of it without exposing the other, and vice versa. So I've got a couple of images where I just cut a circle in a piece of black paper and exposed in the middle, and I really, really enjoyed doing that. Again, it kind of looks a bit like a portal. It looks like you're looking into somewhere else that you could just step through and be there, and I quite enjoy that. Sometimes neurodivergent people wish they could do that, especially in a lot of the situations they find themselves in where they can't cope. So in page 78, I have the enclosed scenes. So I had been looking at dioramas, and I made a cranky theatre in second year, and I think it's relevant now still, where I'm creating like a little narrative in a straight line where I can move it and stuff, similar to using like bowls and plates and vases to tell stories where they've got illustrations on them. This is like just one long sheet of paper. I thought that was quite cool. And then obviously you've got dioramas where you set scenes and you keep them enclosed in a box. But I like to consider the fact that if I had a box of a room, which I did end up having, the cutouts in it is almost like the room itself is a diorama, and it is like the room is being presented to an outside force also. So like you can be, the viewers are like little people inside this diorama almost. So page 80 is looking at Basma Al-Sharif, who is an artist that looks at like lost land and lost locations and stuff, and again they use this kind of void looking circle to show this missing piece from the land, from the landscape. You've got the tree there with the white circle, but as if someone has rubbed it out, and same with the black circle in the sky. You can't see anything beyond it. It sucks in everything and leaves nothing left almost. So page 81, so from 81, 82 and 83 are all images that I made in second year. Again, I like to reference back to old works, just because a lot of my themes have stayed reasonably the same, just exploring them deeper and just other aspects of it. Obviously I wasn't talking about neurodivergence back then, but I was talking about fiction, creating narrative within images, and working with scene setting as well. So on page 84, I was looking at childhood imagery and the utopian impulse. So these are pictures from the Moomins, like the scenes that they used in the backgrounds. But it is quite well known that the Moomins are deeply inspired by the idea of the utopian impulse when they were being created by Trove Johnson or something. I think that's her name. But so this childhood imagery and images that you're exposed to in childhood, where they are these almost perfect places, but they're not perfect in the sense of it being a utopia, but it is utopian in its thought and in its intention. So there is a big difference between utopian thought and utopia. Utopia isn't achievable, but if you believe in the principle of hope, utopian thought is what drives humanity forward. So then I wanted to look at how contemporary artists use storytelling within their work. Obviously, I've looked at other artists like Charles Avery and David Blandy and stuff, but one of my favourite artists ever is Zadie Shah, and her work looks at Korean folklore and relates it to contemporary issues of being, a Korean Canadian from, an immigrant family, but she uses a lot of fabric and painting on fabric and stuff, which I was really enjoying. As a concept, I've always really enjoyed. Painting on things that aren't canvases really intrigues me. And I like the fact she tries to make these gorgeous garments and they end up becoming paintings, and they're just, and they have a story to tell also, and that she uses text also, which I am a big fan of. So then, after looking at Zadie Shah, I really wanted to explore the idea of a costume. So obviously masks is something I've explored with the ceramic masks, and considering the idea of masks slipping off and masks breaking and being too heavy to wear. But now I think this was where I wanted to look at costume as a whole, something that you wear to become someone else. So on page 88, I say, in the context of paracosms and finding belonging, again, paracosm being a world that you built in your head, what if to get to a paracosm you wore something the way a child would? When a child wears their Spider-Man costume or their princess costume, all of a sudden they're Spider-Man, So what if to go into this place in your head, you want to wear a costume, you want to be in character? So that's where I start to look into some of the bigger development ideas. And on page 90 is where the first kind of spark for the idea of the astronauts that came into my head. And so I'll just finish this on a nice little quote from page 91. Fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people, gives us the gift of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over. Neil Gaiman. So thank you for listening, and I will see you in Sketchbook 2.